there's like a Gnostic or esoteric idea of evil that's a bit more potent, that supposes that actually the Christian conceptualization of God is
Mhm.
more evil, and that
And then the devil kind of just said, "Look what you're doing. I'm here to tempt you, but you're here to kill me. So who's the evil person now?"
it's kind of a
Mm.
common understanding that if people don't have hard times, they're worse people. And
Mm.
if you have that as an axiom, it then follows that you can arbitrarily do bad things to people because it makes them stronger. So you ready to jump into it?
Yeah.
Um, what were you said you just finished watching, was it like 11 hours of lectures?
Yeah.
What
It's
lectures were you
about
watching?
13 to
13
14
hours?
hours. Yeah, I'm just going through the lectures. It's the last one that I think I went through the philosophy courses, the postmodern philosophy and the modern philosophy by Stephen Hicks. Um, yeah, I find it really interesting. Yeah.
What do you think about postmodern philosophy? Did you know much about it? Because when you do your sort of like studies, I don't
Hmm.
know if you jump into postmodern philosophy a bit, because the classical stuff is generally Enlightenment era
Hmm.
or modern.
Yeah, I'd say. Remember, I mentioned to you before, even before the philosophy of religion. I'm not sure if you take the philosophy of religion yet. I mentioned that I don't think there's a difference between theology and philosophy, right? I think they're one. Um, you really can't separate the two. So before taking the postmodern philosophy course, I had a feeling that Nietzsche was kind of like the precursor of postmodern philosophy, and then I watched it, and Stephen Hicks actually said that. So yeah, it's interesting about the connection because, like for instance, Foucault talk about power. So I did wonder whether, is this something more of a like a Nietzschean power, type of what did he derive that from Nietzsche? Um, I'm not sure if he did. I need to rewatch the course, but there, I think from Hicks, Stephen Hicks, I think that he is saying that it could have come from Nietzsche's ideas. Um, Foucault is mainly all from Marx, but I think some of the ideas are from Nietzsche. So it's interesting on how you draw the line, the sequence of the ideas are being developed. Um, yeah. What do you think about the postmodern philosophy? Have you taken it?
Yeah, I took it. I took it. I don't know if I remember I definitely remember sort of
Mm-hmm.
Foucault, and um,
Uh,
I so like
Derrida.
Derrida, that's the other one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I I think these ideas like there's a maybe am I understanding this incorrectly or am I understanding this correctly? There seems to be something which is sort of very true about what they're doing, which is that they're kind of going like, well, at the deepest level, what can we actually show or prove or know? And then they're also like they're highlighting something true about psychology, or sorry, about philosophy, which is that like once this is I think a good way to think about it. Once you know philosophy, then power games maybe aren't as important because you have the tools, but like even before getting there, how do you get
Mhm.
there? Like if you don't have power, if you don't have enough resources to spend the time to, because Plato talked about philosopher kings, where sort of
Mhm.
philosopher kings needed to, they can't be like people who are working all the time. They need to have sort of that
Mhm.
space to be in philosophical territory. And
Mhm.
so this is where you could view power as an element where like, yeah, philosophy in its own stands on pure information, not power derived, but until you get there, like the idea to even look into philosophy, you could view that as power because you have to be in the right circles to like to know think about philosophy, or you know what I mean? Like there's a way in which information is dependent
Mhm.
on your circumstances, which is sort of power. So I mean that's I think
Mhm.
the the thing of truth in it, and also sort of the Derrida, I think it's Derrida idea of language all being
Mm.
self-referential. These are
Yeah.
like interesting ideas. My understanding is that the conclusion is that they're sort of then deriving arbitrary rules for power from it.
Mm.
Because my feeling is that if this movement was sort of honest to its core, it would have been equivalent to an ego death. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the ego death concept where there's like so ego death is like you have a death of an identity. You view something
Mm.
as your identity, like Freud's ego. There's something about yourself that you view as you, and then a deep ego
Mm.
death is like you suddenly no longer see yourself. You see something bigger than that, and um,
Mm.
it it
Mm.
feels like the death aspect of it, which is like the death of belief in, because that's what Nietzsche is like he's this kind of
Mm.
we're we can't be
Mm.
certain about the axioms of philosophy is what he's kind of saying. So it's this kind
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
yeah. So
Yeah. I do want to clarify with the ego death. Did you derive that from Freud? Because what I mean, what I understand about um ego is, you have the id, which is your biological impulse, and ego is the one that kind of it. Would I say that's an identity? Maybe to an extent it is an identity, but its ego is something that kind of subverge or subvert the biological drive, and super ego is the one that is kind of like a moral compass. Um, so maybe there's a different reference that you mean by ego. Is it something like a general ego death, or kind of like identity death that you're referring to, or is it like a Freudian
now, how
understanding
did you
of
define ego precisely again? As
so
something which subverts the natural drives?
yeah, yeah, kind of like a higher, it's not really consciousness, but it's higher. um it's I don't know. I need to go back to Freud. So ego is something. Id is the biological drive that we have, such as we feel hunger. Our if we don't have an ego, we're just gonna go to whatever we want to do. So ego is the one that is kind of like a consciousness that tells you what you need. Yeah, maybe to an extent that is an identity. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Ignore my question. Yeah.
Well,
Going back to, yeah. Sorry.
was just gonna say it is a very fair question, I think, because ego is defined differently by each circle. Each circle just has a bit of a different definition of it. So the
Yeah.
the Eastern people define ego as the thing you're trying to get rid of. So like Jung is the one I'm driving my definition of ego from.
Yeah.
So an ego death, like an actual Jungian ego death, is where you no longer perceive yourself. You perceive like you're viewing stuff. This is something which the common person will never experience necessarily.
Mhm.
You're having an experience where you're seeing like things which are not yourself. You can no longer track back to your memories and go like, "Oh, this is
Mhm.
me." You're like you're no longer there. That's an ego death. And then there's
Yeah.
maybe the last definition of ego death is which is like the kind of psychedelic culture of ego death, which so like
Mm.
the Jungian ego death only like if it happens, you can't have it sustained because an ego death and for it's you're not there. It's like not a tenable way to live. And then the psychedelic culture ego death is like um something which they strive for. Like OT have ego
Yeah.
death is like, to not be selfish is kind of the idea.
Right. Yeah. I think with Jung, he has a different paradigm than Freud. I think he put ego as the first line, and then I just forgot the other layers. Because for Freud, it's definitely id, ego, and then superego. For Jung, it's different. I think he put ego at the very starts, and then he goes to the two other layers, which I forgot. Um, but Jung is a fan of Freud, and was he a teacher of Freud? Or was he a student of? I don't know. But yeah, we can go with that definition of what you said.
He was, yeah, a student and then maybe a bit of a friend, and then he kind of had a falling out, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Sorry, I just got in lost into the primary question. Was it the understanding of the power games, isn't it? So
Right.
so with Nietzsche, I'm just gonna go back to Nietzsche because Nietzsche's, remember the post that I tag you in, the comment that I tag you in, it's, if you understand Freud, no, Nietzsche, when he defined nihilism, there's passive nihilism, there's active nihilism. So he laid out that there's no meaning to life. I think from an average person's understanding of it, it's kind of, there's no happiness, there's no actual, um, like kind of like an existential crisis, something like that. But what he meant by that is because he didn't like the Greeks, he didn't like um, Immanuel Kant. And if you understood them, Greek philosophers and Kant, they are into this universal kind of like a logical sequence that even if you don't know empirically or you don't know any pure knowledge, something that sustains and governs the entire reality. And Freud, no, I keep on saying Freud. Nietzsche is saying that is also what Immanuel Kant is saying, and the Greeks are saying are all humanly constructed, such as mathematics is humanly constructed. So um, the main argument of Nietzsche is, I mean, most of his arguments are moral framework, but I think you can go, you can jump, you can kind of can have that transferable, um, you can have the same framework in an epistemological or even a metaphysics that's saying that all of these are all humanly constructed. So when what's the postmodernist guy's name? When Foucault started, making his own, thesis, he derived that from Nietzsche, saying there's no meaning to life. It's only about power games. So the fact that, we have this morality is because the white people or the generation of their time are, have that power, and therefore is the one that is governing our society. um, it's the men who are the one who's in control. Um, and it's not because they found or discovered the actual realities of life, but it's just merely because of power games, because they're the ones who, have possess all of the, wealth and power or reputation over the systems. So that's how I understood it from how I kind of derive the ideas from and link them together, um, with what's his name, Derrida. So Derrida is saying that every all of meaning is confined in a language. There's nothing to it, right? Like there's nothing outside of it. So um, again, it is when it kind of defeats the idea of when you mean by God, I can have my definition of God, you can have your definition of God, and there's no unifying narrative between that. So you can create your own definition, and I can create my own definition. So there's nothing. Again, it's kind of like a human constructed form
Mhm.
rather than, oh, we've discovered this from observing reality type of thing. So yeah, that's how I would.
So like that idea can be starts in you can see it in Derrida and you can trace it back to Nietzsche and then even to Kant. And Kant is very, very well respected, but am I understanding Kant's critique correctly to say that Kant is kind of going what we can sort of our models are sort of um loosely fumbling with the real world, but we can't definitively say what it actually is. So like the noumena um is is our perception of the real world and the phenomena is the actual thing. I think that's
No,
right, right?
it is the opposite. So phenomena
Opposite.
is the perception, yeah, and then the noumena is the actual thing. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Okay. So this is where I feel that idea potentially isn't properly worked out is that
Mhm.
that is what you can sort of on a very, very rigorous epistemological level conclude that you don't have a
Mhm.
connection, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily don't have a connection because is
Mhm.
this idea grappled with properly with Kant that basically like just because you can't prove that something from a very rigorous philosophical perspective is grounded in reality doesn't mean it isn't grounded in reality. Like you could perceive something, right? You perceive something, it's an object in time and space. The light waves are traveling through the air, reaching your eye, and then you have a perceptual framework to view that thing. Now,
Mhm.
you can say that, well, because of all the space in between and all the abstraction that's required, that you're not actually witnessing the actual thing, but you might also be witnessing the actual thing. You just can't prove that you are. Like, what if you
Mhm.
just sort of happen to also, what if phenomena and noumena happen to be one and the same? It's
Mhm. Mhm.
possible, right?
Yeah. The thing with Kant is I haven't actually read the entire um the entire book. Um, but what he's saying is, at the very first chapter, like the introduction, there's a difference between, empirical knowledge. What you talk about is empirical knowledge, but there are some limitation of empirical knowledge, such as, how would you understand 2 plus 2 is equal to 4? Like you can't see that. You can't. It's a humanly, it's not even humanly constructed. It is kind of innate to us. Like even a 3-year-old would understand it's a 2 plus 2. Sorry, maybe not 3, maybe 5 years old. You know, 3 plus 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. That is the limitation of empirical knowledge. So everything what you said is true, but that is the realm of empirical knowledge. So the empirical of a priori, which is the pure knowledge, is his what also he criticized, because he's saying there that there's also limitation in that area. One example of that is, um, so an a priori. One example of an a priori is, every change must have a cause, right? So that is true. You don't need to see that in order for you to believe it. Like if my cup is here, I can see a cup right now, and if it's the next day it move, I know that it is somebody has touched it. Um, so that is an empirical, you can derive that empirical cause. But and you don't need a camera or an observation for you to know that. You know to yourself that someone has moved this. Does that make sense? So, but the problem with that every change must have a cause proposition is, you can't know that without empirical observation, right? So how would you know? You can't. You just, that statement itself is the only thing that you know. You can't understand it without observing things, right? And then he laid out three examples of how pure knowledge is limited, because at some point you will question God, you will question freedom, and you will question immortality. All of this can be formulated pure knowledge. Like you don't need empirical evidence to know that. We know that there's, well, it depends if you believe in God, but if you go with a metaphysical classical um, definition of God, is purely pure knowledge, right? And so as immortality, so we don't know anything about that. But you cannot know it unless you observe it, unless if you experience it, unless you felt it. So Kant was criticizing, the title of the book is Critique of Pure Reason, is he's criticizing the pure knowledge itself. He's criticizing, I forgot the name of the philosopher, Leibniz, Wolff, and the rationalists. He was
Right.
criticizing all of that, the a priori. So and then I think that led to the kind of that led given more power to the postmodernists, and actually quoting Kant, um, which it's fair enough. I think if you kind of read Kant, you kind of understood that. What if everything is humanly constructed? What if if there's limitation to pure knowledge, then how can we know that we're actually you know in truth? What if it's being, again, going back to Descartes, what if we're being tricked here? So yeah, so that's from what I understood about um Immanuel, let's just say Immanuel Kant's contribution to that led to the postmodernist. Yeah.
Hmm. Trying to see if I'm understanding this correctly.
Mm,
Mm, It seems like though that that there is with any information, there's a way to deconstruct it to a point where it can no longer be verified. Like absolutely
mm,
any information. All axioms can be deconstructed to the point where they're no longer verifiable. Take any axiom, the fact that there's logic, that there are things that there is, and just like that something at all exists. Any of these axioms can be deconstructed to a point where you can then no longer support them. And so this kind
mm,
of critique, I wonder where these critiques sort of don't do anything because
mhm.
there's a way of philosophizing where you basically blow the whole thing up. You start doing something. If you take pure deconstructionism, you blow the whole system up, and you go, okay, well, if we have to verify everything, then we won't get anywhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where the pragmatist comes in, saying, yeah, maybe, but then we need to put up some values. We need to move on. We need to stop with this rotational circular problem, and we need to start with how we can contribute to society. Like, well, we need to define things based on value. So if something is more valuable to you, you know, then you must pursue that. So it is kind of a subjective, you know, kind of philosophy, but then it progresses us, kind of thing. What's the name of the I think Bertrand Russell? I'm not sure if this is in the postmodern philosophy or it's the very first chapter, or is it in the modern philosophy. He said that the purpose of philosophy is to break our. I'm paraphrasing. I forgot the exact wording. The purpose of philosophy is to break down our beliefs. Um, maybe we could construct, but that's a good thing. Which mean which we can we're not easily swayed by our belief. Like, we question things, we examine things, kind of like a dialogos, but it's like more personal to yourself. You kind of not sure um if a certain element, or if a certain reality is true, and that in itself is good. um
mhm.
yeah, so yeah, I understand their criticism, but yeah, and that's why I'll kind of go with the pragmatist.
Well, like I think yeah, what you're expressing there is really critical too. Is that like when you do deconstruct philosophy entirely, then you know what you're working from. Sort of, you know where pragmatism comes in. You know where it's not just like because before in the sort of naive a priori philosophical reasoning age, people would go, well, we can reason from these certain things. We can reason from I
Mhm.
think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
And then you realize absolutely everything can be
Mhm.
deconstructed to a
Yeah.
degree. Now, yeah, even uh, and then maybe the attempt is basically to do that, deconstruct it all the way back, know where the starting points are, know
Mhm.
where the axioms
Mhm.
have to be invoked, and then where the what you can build entirely solidly on.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. Um, science is like, how would you categorize science? It definitely started from Bacon, and I think what science did is you have a number of empirical evidence from various people, put that in a measurement. Um, no, yeah, number of empirical evidence in one data, and you use a mathematical formula. You kind of use logic there, and you have predict statistical probability that this may be true. Um, and you answer your hypothesis, which is, is this treatment gonna be effective or not? So it's like a kind of like a combination thing. So I wouldn't necessarily, deny the that we can't truly know things. Um, I mean, that's on the philosophical side, because in Christianity, Jesus said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. He didn't say, this is the way, that is the way, or you need to understand this. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Um, so I think the problem, you know, that we have right now as a society is because of what the postmodernists inflicted on, which is, oh, we can't really know things. You know, your gender is it's just humanly constructed. You can create your own gender. Um, and then yeah, so on and so forth. So I think Christianity is something that we cannot know, um, but it's more on belief, isn't it? Like, it's more on faith, in, in faith in that figure, in Jesus, for you to know the truth, um, which is also revolutionary. Uh, so I think what philosophy did to me, or does, or at least to me, is you can't really know it. You can only believe it. I don't know. I don't know how you would see that. Um, but you kind of have to choose which one you would believe in, kind of thing. Or maybe there are some areas where you have to be nihilist, kind of like a C chain, keychain, Swiss knife. If nihilism fits on this one, maybe use nihilism. If you use empirical on this one, then maybe use empiricism. I don't know. Um, I can't. We can't be guaranteed for sure, but again, that's why I don't like philosophy. It's just
You
running
don't
around in
like
circles,
philosophy? Yeah, you've studied a lot. I mean, I like philosophy. You've like
right?
read more books about philosophy than anybody I've ever met. I don't like it.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't like
Um,
fiction. You read like
I know I started reading
Dostoevsky.
fiction. Oh my gosh, I just finished War and Peace. I mentioned that to you, right? And what I enjoyed about it is, at first I was like, what am I reading? I just couldn't understand a single thing. And then a friend told me, the fact that you don't understand, and the fact that you feel that it's chaotic is actually what Leo Tolstoy meant it to be. Because life itself is chaotic. Um, the people surrounding you are, it's like similar to the people in War and Peace, and the characters in War and Peace are superficial. Um, and there's no hero in War and Peace. There are characters, but there's no one who fought Napoleon and won. So most of the characters that went to war died, and that is, social realism. That is true. Like, if I go to war, even though I want in glory, I want to go through my name, um, the chances of me achieving that is lower, and the chances of me dying is higher. So yeah, so I am getting into fiction now. um, Interestingly enough, yeah.
Do you find you like extract ideas from fiction though? Because
Mhm.
I don't do fiction because I just want information as quick as possible, as succinct, and I feel like that's in
Mhm.
philosophical literature.
Yeah. So you read nonfiction, kind of like a self-help, and whenever an idea comes in, you immediately apply it to your life, and then you experiment on it. Is that what you do?
What, did you say fiction? Do I read fiction that way?
So if you read nonfiction, you said that you don't read fiction, you read nonfiction. So when you read a nonfiction, is it you gather ideas, like extract ideas from there, and then you apply it instantly in your life? Is that why you read nonfiction?
Well, I my feeling is that our minds are constructed like, I'm going to go back to this significant ancient symbol, like the tree of knowledge. Our minds are trees of knowledge, where you have information structures that the different branches maybe, start very, very, very abstract with core axioms like love, heroic myth,
Mhm.
logic, very, very core, building up to different higher iterations of logic and different archetypes and all these things. You have this tree of knowledge. And um, is it something I apply directly? Well,
Mhm.
it's maybe an understanding of the world. And my feeling is that s- like I just don't generally find stories give as much of those branches or leaves to the
Right,
tree.
right, right. I, no, I was like that. I know this year is probably, I mean, no, I started maybe last year when I read Karamazov, with the Dostoevsky books that I read. Um, but I understand what you mean. But it's interesting how you said that because you said I don't read fiction, and then you poetically illustrated this tree, or you have that kind of like a symbol, a metaphorical
I'm literally talking
figure.
about a fiction, maybe, or a myth. Some people would say, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
is
A
actually
symbol.
very interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you said that. Yeah. There
Well,
are.
I'll just throw this in quickly, but I do like fiction, which is mythologically dense. So, like Game of Thrones, there's another tree metaphor in there. There's this character that is like a seer that is like really wise, and he meets like a tree that's like melding into the ground, and he's sort of becoming, or I don't know. So, but I like literature, like Narnia or
Mm,
these
mm,
things where
mm.
the it is
Yeah,
expressed in that deep symbolic form. I find that interesting.
yeah. It is. Yeah, it is. It is. So I've recently just read Narnia as well. The archetypal of Narnia, sorry, Aslan is Jesus Christ, right? So he's God. And you can see how it plays out, with the kids that he gathered, and the kids became kings and queens, um, by by being with Aslan. And people are, the evil people are scared of Aslan, but they still insisted on deceit, um, and tricking, or kind of like want to destroy the world. Um, so it is kind of still our reality, right? So we have evil people, even though they kind of know God, but they still continued, with that. So I find that really interesting. I mean, it's not necessarily that I gain something from it, although there are some books that I really gain from something. Um, like for instance, Barbara Karamazov. I'm not sure if you read it, but there's a character named Ivan who's a the intellectual. There's Alyosha who is faith based, and Dostoevsky, you know, guided you on how their lives are lived. So it makes you think, because of the consequence of what happened to Ivan and the consequence of what happened to Alyosha. Even though Alyosha didn't earn material possession, he earned the love of people, and he just continued serving others. So it makes you think: should I be Alyosha or should be Ivan? And you might think that's a simple question, but it's not really a simple question, because you can go with: should I be faithful? Should I be in service of others? Should I be, those are the questions in that captured in one character. Should I be Ivan, who is enlightened, who is powerful, who is intellectually articulate? In one question, should I be Ivan? So yeah, it is kind of like simplifying all of the concepts and paradigms into one figure. So um, I mean, that's at least on how I understood Brother Komatsu. So the book that I'm reading right now is Demons by Dostoevsky. So interestingly, so there are two characters. Is the main characters, Barbara Patnoma and Stefan Profinovich. Um, they are the kind of like idealist people. Um, and interesting enough, Stefan Profinovich is the university professor. And what Dostoevsky wrote is these are the idealists, and the one who's going to accomplish kind of the crimes are their sons. Um, so that's why the book is called Demons. So these are the demons, and the sons are the one who's going to accomplish what the idealist is um, initially formulated. So in real life, it's actually true. Mikhail Foucault was the one who initiated with this power dynamics, and it's just up to now that we're experiencing those effects, right? So I just find that it really interesting. Like, how did Dostoevsky know that? If you ask this question, how did
No, I didn't quite
he?
understand what you meant there. What exactly did he know that we're seeing now that we're just seeing that
Sorry.
now it's happening?
So in the Book of Demons, so there's first line of character, and they're the idealist one. They're ones who, go on debates, who go atheistic, socialist, liberal. Um, then it's funny enough, one of the characters is also a university lecturer. Um, and then their sons are the one who kind of applied those principles and kind of created havoc to the society. In real life, for me, it's kind of like Dostoevsky prophesied it, like he predicted it. So
That was
in
happening at
our
his time, though. Like atheists and those things were all present at just Dostoevsky's time period. Like that was all already there.
but
Well,
the non-binaries, all of this complexity of the genders are just happening right now. It didn't happen
oh,
before.
he
I'm not sure
predicted
if it
that.
happened before, huh?
He predicted that. Oh, I didn't know that's what you meant.
Yeah. What I mean is that there's the first line, the idealists like Foucault and Derrida, and then the next generation were the one who kind of implemented those ideas.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Sorry. So
Well, I think
yeah.
I
So
understand the abstract level of it. Like you're talking about some concept which we're seeing now, which he sort of predicted. I just don't understand the exact concept
right,
you're
right, right.
describing.
Yeah, yeah. So what I mean by that is there's the ideas will be started. The actual destruction of the society will be first started with the idealist, the first characters that I mentioned, and then the second, their sons were the one who kind of implemented those actions. So it kind of is
Oh, I got you.
what
I got you.
happened, what is happening right now.
He's
Yeah,
describing the abstract principle as well. I see. I see.
yeah.
I think I see.
So it is happening right now in our society, that we have these weird ideas. It's because of the people who thought about this before, like the
Hmm.
previous generation who thought about this before. So it's interesting on how Dostoevsky, I'm not sure if he knows that, or did he
Now,
just, yeah.
yeah, or did he just sort of like express patterns that were emanating meaning and they were not articulatable? So therefore, you're giving a case for why literature is interesting
Yeah,
because he's able to
yeah.
express something which is not formulated in literature. Now, I'll strip what I'm saying of its nuance and express just the skeleton form of why I still find it difficult to listen to literature is this. So you talk about like different patterns and ideas being expressed, sort of being able to see real things about the world, learning from that. This is going to sound really, really dogmatic, but one can view reality like it's very, very, very simple to some extent, like morally simple. So when it comes to like sort of like morally difficult questions at
Mhm,
a more primitive level, you can break it down to very simple things like, well, it's just keep certain archetypes within yourself. Keep the sacrifice archetype, keep the brave hero archetype, keep the archetype of love,
mhm,
keep logic and reason. And if you just do these things, then you're there. Like there isn't some sort of higher order complexity, which is always like sort of beckoning to you. Like in actual life, it seems not too complicated to some degree. It seems like if you are just very, very, very truthful, very, very
mhm,
brave, just entirely brave, like just to the extreme, like perception of seeing sort of this complex soap opera of people who are not this way or this it's not
Mm,
necessarily helpful because you're going to see that in your life anyway, just
yeah,
by
yeah,
having clear
agreed.
vision and not distorting your own vision, which is why um it feels like the when you understand those deep principles, sacrifice entirely, sacrifice everything, love selflessly and unconditionally, be brave entirely. Once you have those principles, like, is there any need to see another fiction? Those ideas are constantly re-expressed throughout history, but
Yeah. I mean, Jesus simplified that. What are the two commandments, right? Love God and love others. That's a very simplified version of all of the concepts. All
yeah.
it's again, it's like, what do you mean by God? It's like, I mentioned about Ivan. What do you mean by Ivan? An intellectual, someone is this. So what do you mean by God? So you have those principles in you, and what do you mean by others? So you know, you have those layers, different layers. It's like it's a symbol. Um, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm gonna probably put out, because I mean, you weren't really bashing literature, but you kind of see this as, kind of like a one thing. One really great example that I want to mention is Elon Musk. Um, Elon Musk was obsessed with stories, with sci-fi fiction, and he said in many interviews of the stories that he read before, and he is kind of like putting it in reality. So I mean, I don't know. So Jordan Peterson mentioned fiction before as, art is something that is exploring of the unknown, and that science or later generation are the one who kind of orders it. So you explored on something, and then the next generation people would be the one who's putting it into perspective. Is this true? Is this true? Is this true? So yeah, that's how I would probably define it, or at least describe it. Um,
Mhm.
because, like, for instance, Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace doesn't have a hero's journey narrative. They all died. Now, would you say then that shouldn't be your archetype? Maybe. But then it is kind of true that if you go to war, the chances of you dying is very high. Um, War is a symbol. You can put it out as, whatever venture you're gonna go to. Like, for instance, if you want to become a writer, the chances of you becoming a successful writer is very high. It's very low. So you're gonna be competing with a lot of really great writers, but it doesn't mean that you should avoid it. But there's still a case to be made for there. Not everybody is gonna become great. Um, I know it's really sad, but it is what it is. And sounds pessimistic as well. Um, but yeah, I do think that, yeah, I don't know where I'm gonna go from there. Um,
Mm.
I kind of lost my line of thought.
Yeah, well, there's sort of a lot of maybe disjoint ideas um,
Yeah.
uh, bubbling up, and I'm kind of thinking in the same terms. I sort of have just a lot of things I'm thinking about. One of them is, you reminded me of this with one of the things you were just talking about now. The you talked about just a bit before was sort of the evil, that you said something about, even the characters knew that God was more powerful, yet they were still evil,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because this is something we were chatting about just in the Peterson Academy direct messages, that
Hmm.
you said you were writing a story where
Hmm.
you had sort of you were representing evil, and one
Yeah.
property of evil was that, like, it's it's known that it's not the most powerful
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I was presenting this counter idea that there's like a Gnostic or esoteric idea of evil that's a bit more potent, that supposes that actually the Christian conceptualization of God is
mm,
more evil, and that the because
mhm,
um it doesn't it I think that that conceptualization of evil as those who are actually performing evil, like they view it as evil. I don't think that's how they
mm,
actually view it. I think that's how
yeah,
people view them viewing it, but I feel like they suppose it's good. This is non sequitur entirely, but I just wanted
mm,
to mention it because we sort of direct message talked and said we were
mhm,
going to talk about that potentially.
yeah. Yeah, the idea of evil knows God is, is from Narnia. And even in the Bible, it's you know, Satan, which is very odd. He tempted Jesus 3 times. He knows he's the Son of God. He knows he's the Messiah. The devil knows that he's the Son of God. The devil knows he's Messiah. Why did he tempt Jesus? It is leaves a question. So a lot of Christians would kind of just brush it out and say, well, obviously he would conquer evil, um, so therefore he's the Son of God. But that those questions for me, when even especially when I was young, always leaves me, struck. It struck me as, what the hell? Like, I don't understand this narrative. He's the Son of God. Why is someone, Lucifer, who was disposed out of heaven, would tempt this, would tempt God? Like, I don't. It's a heavy concept that I still grapple. Hence why whenever I started, just being ambitious of writing a novel. So in the novel, um, I that I'm writing, sorry, it's so the devil was trying to tempt the man, so that the man got upset and just got fed up, and he took the knife and wants to kill the devil, and then the devil kind of just said, "Look what you're doing. I'm here to tempt you, but you're here to kill me. So who's the evil person now?" So it's a question. It's a genuine question that I have in my head, because there are certainly events that we have. Is it the temptation that is evil, or is the one who did, the one who killed, um the one who kind of executed the thoughts are the one who's evil? Yeah, I don't know. It's something that I'm playing around it. It's I don't have any conclusion to it. I think so. Dostoevsky put it out as like this. When Ivan was confronting Alyosha, he laid out the most powerful case of evil, um, of someone who's an innocent girl who is betrayed by the parents, who was tortured by the parents, um, and abandoned the child without any regrets, nor any guilt whatsoever. So that's like the most powerful case that you can, with the problem of evil. And Alyosha didn't answer the question. The only thing he did was he kissed Ivan. That was his action. And Dostoevsky kind of is writing, for me, what I understood it is, you cannot define suffering. You cannot put out a moral kind of like argumentation about suffering. Um, and Alyosha didn't have any answer to that. He just kissed, kind of like showed compassion and showed love, instead of examining yourself what is right and wrong. So yeah, it's yeah. I don't know where I'm gonna go from there.
Like so the devil tempted Jesus. That's a how could the devil tempt tempt God because God has this sort of divine understanding? How could something sort of be tempting? This is where I feel like this happens to people all the time. Not a trivial thing, a very, very, very deep thing where and this is why I think the culture maybe is
Mm,
held back in many ways is because people do fall to this temptation of evil. Good people which is what makes Jesus remarkable that he didn't fall to this temptation. But like,
Yeah.
I think kind of everybody is under the sway of evil in this one specific narrative, which is seems to be the ultimate evil narrative, the ultimate Luciferian narrative, which is
Mm,
that imposed suffering is somehow a good in some way. So like you're a business owner, this is an example I'm thinking of, or let's say you're a billionaire. The the evil in this case is there's an understanding that it's actually good for people to have hard times because that actually helps them navigate the terrain. I think this is a big problem. It's a big issue because if you go into that philosophically, it's not so easy to clear out the moral terrain because you can actually argue that it is better for people to have difficult lives so that they can get stronger. This is what everybody believes. People say like, weak times make weak people, and then weak people
mm,
make tough times. It's kind of a
mm,
common understanding that if people don't have hard times, they're worse people. And
mm.
if you have that as an axiom, it then follows that you can arbitrarily do bad things to people because it makes them stronger.
Yeah.
And so that is where I view that as like a really, really deep level of this sort of Satan coming to Jesus and tempting him because
Mm,
it's 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 so deeper than just, well, should I be nice to somebody? It kind of blows out the whole thing at the axiomatic level. It's like, what does it even mean to be nice? Like, can you even define that? I mean, it sounds
mm, mm,
postmodern, but I don't think this is actually that big of I don't think this is an unresolvable problem. I'm sort of
mm,
highlighting it because I feel like it's a important thing to look at to start to resolve because I don't think people are. I don't think people are addressing that sort of you could
mm,
define it
mm.
as satanic thread
Yeah.
throughout history.
Yeah. I okay. So I want to comment to the first, the first sentences that you mentioned. Um, I forgot the exact wording, but it's something like it is reality, and I think it is. It may be just simple as that. So that even if you are the best person, you're still gonna have temptation because we have a. I mean, this stems from the Bible as well. Like we have we have human flesh, so therefore we're always gonna have those temptations in mind, and maybe that's why Satan tempted. It's an archetype of reality that Jesus, coming from having a human flesh, would have temptations. Um, so it's not necessarily that there's a live devil who comes and then tempts you. It's a metaphor of saying if you are human, you're definitely gonna have temptation, maybe. Um, but the explanation you mentioned afterwards of suffering being necessary for you to become better, there's a problem with that with innocence or someone who started having some diseases, such as a child who has leukemia, right? So how would you conceptualize that? Like, so someone who's got leukemia mostly is gonna die. I mean, we have treatments now, but is it really necessary for that person to suffer when others like the majority didn't have to undergo that? So that is the problem. It's actually in the new course, philosophy of religion, the problem of evil. Um, which again, going back to Dostoevsky didn't solve or try to argue the problem of evil. He the only action that he did was he kissed the person to show kind of like show compassion or there. Um, but yeah, no, it is definitely the case that we need suffering. In our case, we do need suffering because I find the more comfortable I am, the more that I deteriorate. The more uncomfortable I am, the more that I excel or improve. I don't know if it's the same in your case.
I this is where so that is interesting. So you express the issue of sort of needless suffering as kind of a defined evil that cannot be supported, and I would agree with that. And my contention wasn't at that level; it was at the level of suffering, which helps somebody succeed. And this is where I would actually basically combat that and say that um, there is actually no necessity for suffering at all. I would define what suffering does is as the following: suffering, sort of difficult things that make you stronger do not make you stronger in an interesting way. They make you stronger in only the way it relates to that specific problem. So let's say you are in a house, you're in a log cabin, and there's wolves that kind of always attack your place. Just thinking of an sort of an abstract archetypal example. Um, you go, well, person is learning how to be strong in tough times, but all they're learning is how to fend off wolves. It's a very one-dimensional
Yeah.
improvement scope. And so
Mhm.
this is what I would this is what I think actually is actually happening is that there's maybe psychological problems people have that make them not motivated to do things. And so suffering motivates them to do things, but suffering is has never been humans' strongest motivational feature. Like animals have this all the time. Their entire life is sort of uh, imposed struggle and then
Mhm.
difficulty. The thing that really differentiated humans at the inception of humanity was that humans are sexually selective because that's a higher order function. If your motivational system is just to stay alive, then you're like you have a stress imposed that in it kind of requires things for you to do, but it's much more primitive, much more clumsy than if you have another conscious being imposing that selection on you. So this is where I would say like you could
Mhm.
you could take away all the suffering in the world and the force that really gave humans their consciousness told about in the Garden of Eden where that's sort of the symbolism of that story. That function doesn't disappear because you have
Mhm.
somebody who doesn't need to do anything in life, right?
Mhm.
Are they going to do something? Certainly they will because it's not a negative selection force selecting
Mhm.
against them. It's a positive one. They want to have relationships. If you
Yeah.
want to have a relationships, if you want to exist in this higher order systems of society, you have to do things. There's no
Mhm.
necessary for a negative force in that way.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. It's So suffering is I think it's inevitable. Um, it, I'm not sure if you take it a modern philosophy course, but it was laid out there by the existentialist named Camus, where he portrayed the Greek hero, no, not hero, but a Greek character named Sisyphus, wherein he was cursed by Zeus by having a rock. Um, what was that?
Having to roll it up a hill and then it would roll back
Yeah, roll
down.
up the hill, and then only if you push it up, only for it to go back, and then he has to push it again. So the meaning there is it's how you define your suffering that makes you that makes it meaningful, kind of like an existential classic existential case. Um, with animals, you mentioned, um, yeah, they do have some suffering, but I think it's deeper than that because evolutionary or biologically rather is let's lay out a case of predators. Why do we have predators in the forest? um People think that predators are certainly evil and should be you know um be extinct, but what they do is they kill the weak, they kill the injured, um they minimize the number of um weaker animals that graze the grass, or it just they they maintain the population, they control the population. So that is, I mean, that's one reason why there are predators. um so they spot the injured. um Yeah, I don't know where I'm gonna go from there because
Well,
you put out a lot of examples.
yeah, let me dive deeper into this example for clarification because when you say, well, they kill the weak, you kind of assume that as like a positive function. But why would that be a positive function? So let's imagine an alternative reality where you have creatures with no difficulties. They just kind of exist indefinitely, w- no predators. Now,
Mhm.
when I present this example, you might view this as a bit negative. And why would you view this as negative? Well, because maybe it's very simple. Maybe they're just little frog type things that just bounce around. You go, well, they're not improving. And I think
Right.
that's actually the function of natural
Mm-mm.
selection
I see.
is
I see.
that it's not that it's removal of the weakest. It's actually like a search function. It's like with I don't know if you understand how large language models work or how uh,
A
neural
little bit.
networks. Okay,
Mhm.
so what they do is they have a landscape. They have a multidimensional landscape, and then they have this multidimensional landscape, and then the move towards uh sort of optimal weights is
Mhm.
kind of like sliding down a slope because they're doing little adjustments to get the thing to slowly improve and then slide down a slope. And they have this
Mhm.
problem. The ultimate problem is the false optimum problem, where they have it slide down a slope into a valley, which is a local optimum, but it's not the ultimate optimum because they can only do little adjustments. This is the same thing that happens with evolutionary biology.
Mhm.
They can only have little adjustments, only slight mutations, and then
Mhm.
it has to somehow approach it has to approach kind of an infinite increase in complexity. And
Yeah.
that's where the the predacious element actually has a tremendous and
Mhm.
indispensable effect is that it provides a search function
Mhm.
by 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 causing the friction. It
Yeah.
requires the creature that's in a local optimum to like jump outside of that because it's like, well, this is not working because I'm just getting attacked. I have to then climb out of this local optimum and then
Mhm.
search, and that's where then you get like vast complexity caused by hardship is because they're searching the space.
Yeah. So I do have a question because we mentioned that in an animal realm. What do you think about the human society? Because we have two extremes. You can have the fastest argument wherein the stronger would be the one who's at the top, and that the weaker the one or should be, should be killed. And then there's a communist side wherein the weaker ones, we have to support the weak, and to hell to the successful one, we need to be taking money from them. So I think it kind of is the same um argument on both ways. Um, which I think no, actually no, 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 no. Let me take that back because there's a solution to that. The solution is decentralize and let the free markets. Let we need to have a free market. Like let the market dictate itself rather than controlling it, right? Um, but yeah, sorry, I gonna take that back because what the problem is in our society is we try to control it with government intervention, and that kind of it's manipulating what actually should happen. But it is quite scary because I live in the UK, and it might be the same case in Canada, that there are some homeless people who are being, um, the government is taking the taxpayers' money and using it to fund the homeless people, kind of like still controlling it. Like, would we, if they're controlling, they're manipulating the system when it should be, they should be. It's really hard to say, but they should be, they would be dying in the street if the government does not interfere. So would we then say that that's an evil thing to do? Like, should we just let that happen, um, and allow the inevitable suffering or the death to just occur? Because again,
Well,
we go back. Yeah.
yeah, you're talking about sort of what level government should sort of have it play a role to this. I'm actually not even talking at the government level at all. I don't think that's where the conversation needs to first start happening because like when I bring this up with you, you go like, "Yeah, of course there's the need for difficulty in life." And that's the
Mhm.
level where I think that it needs to happen. Discussion needs to happen because there's different evolutionary stages. So like there was a time when the human species needed uh physical threats. They needed saber-toothed tigers to promote them to sort of evolve away from sort of like large rodents to that's probably not in our evolutionary tree, but to more chimpanzee type things. And so
mm,
that was at one point a necessary force in our
mm,
evolution. And um and then at some point we graduated from that. We became aware of that system and we're like, well, we don't need anymore to be a part of the food chain. Let's step out of the side of the food chain. The food chain played its role in that point, and then we are stepping outside of it. And so what I'm saying here is that um perhaps we can start becoming aware of what the actual function of the predaceous social element is in society, because it's not what we say it is really. Because like
mm,
when people say like we need tough times so that we get stronger, we need hardships so we get stronger, that's not actually the function of it. That's not an honest description of it. The function of it isn't for the individual, it's for the collective. The difficult times promote collective evolution so that it kills off the weak, and then larger scale it has this effect. And um so when you talk about sort of people that are sort of stuck in these like lower states, that is a result of this understanding, this internalized. Essentially what we did was we internalized the
mm,
physical predaceous element. We internalized the saber-tooth tiger and we became our own saber-tooth tiger, per,
mm,
uh, creating these elements. And I'm wondering if we can get to a point where we then start to notice this and we go, okay, well, hold on, where is the search function necessary? Where do we need it, and where do we not need it? Because it may be the case that we no longer need a search function, because this search function of causing hardship for people
mm,
resulted in discovery of all these kind of things. But like, maybe have we discovered enough? Maybe have we
mm,
solved philosophy enough where we can stop imposing this like crazy hardship that
mm,
generates creativity, because it's fundamentally a creativity generating device. It's not a strength generating device. It's purely creativity generating. It's complexity generating. And so
mm,
I don't know if this is sort of answering the question that you're posing. I feel it is, but I'm not sure if I'm exactly connecting it, because you're talking about the homeless person
mm,
outside. That's where I'm saying like the understanding is what needs to happen first. Like, understand why exactly we do this. Like, because it's everybody
mm.
thinks this. Everybody thinks the same
Yeah,
thing. We don't need to even worry about the level of government, because if people all think this, why would we start with government? If what I'm saying is true, that we don't necessarily need it anymore, that maybe it was true, maybe it was necessary for times in past, and maybe now we can actually move beyond having a predacious social element that that forcefully generates people to be more creative.
yeah. I think my criticism is because you mentioned that we are now away of the food chain. My question would probably be, are we aware of the food chain? Are we have we really escaped the food chain? Because in my case, my observation is I don't think we have, because there are people who are predatory. Um, I still see in the society, and they would inflict whatever necessary suffering to those people, just for self gain. Um, I'm not sure if you observe that in your environment, but I certainly have in my case. So I think my argument is purely biological, because I do believe that even if we're away, we're out of the forest, and we live, we created our own society. I do think that there are still wolves, um, that are still lurking around. They're not, they don't have any sharp fangs, but they would do things that's necessarily for them to survive. And then my if you're gonna connect that to my previous thoughts, like, is that necessary for us, you know to allow those so we can kill the weak and to kill the injured? I think that would be a moral question, like a big question mark. um to that's Yeah, I don't know if that's something
I
that.
completely agree.
Yeah.
That it would be a big question. And now, when you said that you think that we do have a predaceous element in society, well, I'm agreeing with you. What I'm highlighting between uh, biological
Mm,
predation, like a bear, and the difference between that and sort of somebody in society, the difference
yeah.
is that it's sort of a graduation. Like,
Mm,
the human species graduated from that problem to a new problem. But like in
yeah.
the same sense, so like, historically, theologically, like the sacrifice sacrifices were for a long time externally practiced. And then when Jesus
Mhm.
came along, that external motif was internalized, where we graduated
Mhm.
having to externally sacrifice creatures to internally sacrificing ideas,
Mhm.
essentially. And so that's
Yeah.
where I see these evolutionary stages where we had external predation and then we made it
Mhm.
social predation. And that's where I'm
Yeah.
wondering,
Yeah.
in the same way, can we then upgrade to not having social predation, but to internalizing that and being our own predator so that we don't
Yeah.
have to prey on other
Yeah.
people?
I think with the suffering, like the animal suffering that we had before, especially if you read some in the Bible, I'm quite skeptic whether there are actual suffer. I mean, maybe I'm being too naive, but I think that because maybe I'm, as Dawkins would say it, I'm maybe drunk in symbols. I think that might be a symbol. Um, well, if it's not a symbol, I don't. If even if it's not a symbol, I do think that we the people, our ancestors weren't just fighting off the animals um like an external thing because they also have to fight with the tribes. So it's like a human
Yeah, yeah,
tribal
yeah.
competition between
True. Okay,
so
okay, okay,
it's
yeah, yeah. That's
yeah,
so
so it's
that's
not
that.
yeah.
Yeah, you keep going.
Sorry,
Sorry.
go. No, go for it.
Okay, okay. I was just gonna say that is a higher resolution example. So you're right. So, but there are stages still though. So there was
Mhm.
the external species preyed on the human
Yeah.
species, the monkeys or whatever, and that increased their evolutionary ability. And then we internalized that. I incorrectly stated to
Mhm.
our own society, but no, to
Mhm.
tribes. That was the next stage.
Right.
Was
Mhm.
between people, then we preyed on each other. And
Yeah.
then we start seeing now more in modern society, we've internalized that to being in society where we're all kind of part of the same system, but we're just socially preying on each other. And then that is
Mhm.
still, it is still suggesting a progression to where at some point we can graduate outside of that and get to a
Mhm.
point where we no longer, we've
Okay.
internalized it entirely.
So I would be very skeptical of that idea. I probably would use Elon Musk because he believes that war would be inevitable. If we travel to Mars, if we happen to inhabit Mars, and then other country would invade another planet, we may say that we have graduated. But I think the next thing that would happen is an intergalactic war. Um, and I'm gonna quote the Bible in this one in Ecclesiastes. Uh, there's what is it exactly? There's a time for everything, a time for war and time of peace. Um, I don't think that you know pre- predators preying on innocents would stop necessarily. I think it is, and I think Foucault to an extent is correct on this one. There's certainly power games that goes on in our society, um, and um, and I don't think it would ever stop. Um, so I'm not sure if that's something that is still connected to the idea that you're articulating or
Now you're talking about sort of the inevitability. You're going to a different place, which is like, well,
correct.
maybe we don't want it to happen, but it's just going to happen anyways. But
Mhm.
that's why is that a problem we need to even address? Because all the bad people say that that a predaceous element is necessary, and all the good people say the same thing. I talk to anybody about this. People all say the
Mhm.
same thing. They're like, well, we need
Mhm.
difficult things. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not solving the problem of actually making it stop
Mhm.
isn't important until we've actually like the first issue to solve is like, well, do we actually still need hard times? And
Mhm.
you said a bit ago, like, well, that's maybe a question worth asking. And this is where um uh, I would almost reverse this and say, well, once if we get to a level of consciousness of the substrate of the system we're existing in, then we should actually ask the opposite question. Well, can we prove that we still need a predaceous element? Because sort of morally speaking, from a human moral position where there's a moral necessity for humans to view human life as and suffering as a like human life is important and suffering is a negative thing. If
Mm,
we view that and we are suddenly aware of our own internalized evil across everybody has this internalized evil that they're sort of at this point I would say arbitrarily saying we need to suffer. Like,
mm,
don't we need to argue that suffering is good stronger other than just like it makes people strong? Because I don't think that's the case. I don't think it makes people strong to suffer. I think it kills people and then it makes society more creative. But like,
mm,
I feel like you could argue that we've gotten to a point of evolution where we have enough creativity. We've solved enough of the philosophical issues that we can graduate past that. And if if we can't if we can't present a strong counter argument as to why
mm,
people need to continue to suffer, then why are we all thinking this?
mm. Okay, I think maybe because I kind of go with suffering as either internal and external because I don't really differentiate the two. I think you kind of go with with one view of internal suffering as whether it's needed or not. Because I my previous statement earlier proposition is there are some needless suffering that happens, such as if you're a victim of war. You know, what is that something that is um needed or necessary or is justified as something that makes us grow. So let's start with that. Is that something that you that what you're talking about? Like, is there like you're focusing on the internal suffering rather than you are you denying that there's no needless suffering that is occurring externally in our society? Is that what you're saying?
Am I denying that there's no needless suffering entering?
Or are you
So
just focusing like if you just are you just focusing on internal suffering right now? Like you're not denying it, but you're not it's not the topic of conversation.
well, it sounds like you're trying to sort of figure out what I'm saying,
Yeah.
and like the thesis of what I'm saying
Sorry, because
is
you know, as I said, I've just got into the 14 hours of lecture, so it's probably because my brain is not
I
functioning enough.
I feel I kind of disagree though. I think that it puts you in a different space if you stay awake for long periods of time. I think it's a different space. It's not a worse space. It's a space which is yeah less analytical, more artistic. But I think both spaces are perfectly good for philosophical discussion. But
Yeah.
to so the thesis of what I'm saying is this. The thesis is what I'm saying is that the large percentage of people on this planet right now have a perception that
Mhm.
it is good for socially imposed suffering to happen, for there to be difficulties for people to have to overcome. And I'm saying
Okay.
that's not necessarily true
Okay.
because we already have a creative inducing element, which is basically just the necessity to reproduce, like or be a part of society. Or so, in order to be a part of society, you have to be sort of a productive member, or in order to have a family, you have to be attractive enough to attract a mate. There's these different things which are not negative. They're just like in order to be a part of something, you have to do. They don't require a predaceous element. So all I'm saying is like everybody thinks that we need to have hardship, and I'm saying why do we think that? I'm outlining it. I'm explaining like the
Mm.
core of it, and then saying like it's not what people
Yeah.
think it is.
Yeah. You're kind of like making a case of kind of like a Nietzsche. Why everybody thinks of truth? Why not untruth? Right? Like you kind of like drawing a parallel there. But I think because the way you infer suffering there is intentional or something that a person has to decide whether he needs to suffer or not. Because for me, suffering is, you know, it can be intentional, but sometimes is inevitable, something that they can't control, something that, um, for instance, if you were born in Africa, you know, you're not born in Canada, you would experience suffering there.
Okay, now
It's
I
not something
understand.
that you, yeah,
Now I
it's not
understand your
something that
question. Yeah.
it's not something that you, oh, I'm gonna choose to, to suffer because it would make me
Yeah, yeah,
glory.
yeah, yeah.
My case is, yeah. So
Okay,
my
got it.
case is
Now,
there are people who are needlessly suffering, who are in this environment of um what should I say, potential. Because even if you use that argument, if you are in Africa, if you were born in Africa, um, I would say that immigrants who are, moved to the Western Hemisphere, they are certainly much more motivated than an average Westerner. Um, and I think that's a consequence of suffering. That's a consequence of having to go through whatever, environment that they had. When I was back home, I was earning £100 a month. That was my first salary. When I came here, it was 2 grand, £2,000. So I certainly have that kind of like an ambition, innate, no, ambition element that was derived from the suffering that I experienced back home. Um, so I think it's not something that I intentionally did. It's something that happened to me. Um, so yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. The
yeah,
intention isn't, or the intention I'm talking about, first of all, isn't your own intention. It's external
yeah,
attention. So it's somebody who owns a
yeah,
business making it harder on their employees.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so this is the classic argument you're going. This is the big argument. I would
Mhm,
I would suppose actually that this is not a strong argument. This is not a rigorous argument. This is where it stops, though, where people say the exact same thing you're saying. They're saying, listen, I have experience where I had difficult times, and then
mhm,
I I saw something where I could do this, and I can sort of
mhm,
achieve things, and
yeah,
and because of the difficult times, it motivated me to do it. And I would
mhm,
just propose, like, well, how philosophically grounded is this argument? Like, it could be the case that you didn't need to suffer. You could have had a okay time where you didn't need to actually, like, where it wasn't difficult, and you
mhm,
you could have. So, like, it could be the case that somebody has all their food and rent paid for, and then they see an opportunity where they can work, make money, sort of go higher up in the social system, maybe
mhm,
attract somebody that is higher
mhm,
status than before, and they're motivated to do it because,
yeah,
yeah.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. I see what you mean. Like, hmm, I'd say, yeah, I see your refutation there.
Well,
Um,
yeah, the reputation of this specific argument is basically that, like, it is just an argument from personal reason. It's just an anecdote, really. It's an
yeah.
anecdote that
So
people view as, yeah.
yeah. So let me flesh out your latter example. So I think it's quite common for Asian women to marry a Western man. And one of my mates, she married a 50-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon in Australia, and she was 23. Now, we see that as, oh, this gold digger. But I was the one who says, you guys are just envious. You just are, my friends, I was referring to my friend, you guys are just jealous because she now doesn't have to work throughout her life. Now, would we say that's good? And I get it. I get what you mean because she can now start having a family. She can start having kids, and those kids are gonna have a good life. Well, it really depends because I find that if kids grow up in a wealthy environment, you know the higher chances of them being spoiled is likely. But it doesn't guarantee that, right? So, um, but there are lots of elites. In fact, a lot of our um, what would I say, the greatest leaders in society, like Napoleon grew up in elite in aristocracy. Caesar was the same. Um, Alexander the Great also was the son of a king. So, it's not a deterministic thing that if you are born in wealth, no suffering, therefore you're gonna end up spoiled or rich, right? It still navigates, it still fluctuates from there. So I would say I wouldn't necessarily mean that I would deny suffering. We can get away with suffering and have less of it and still have a better life. But I would say probabilistically wise. if a person suffers, the likelihood of them getting stronger and better is higher than for those who does not suffer. Would you agree with that? I think it would be kind of like a percentage thing, rather than um
Well,
complete reputation.
this is where I'm proposing that we can isolate the factor in suffering as being not the suffering itself. The motivating factor in suffering is not the suffering itself, but the requirement for something to change,
Mm,
which doesn't necessarily have to be negative. So if if you let me think of an example like this. Let's say you're a rich person, you inherit all this wealth, and
yeah,
this is something I've heard them describe. They don't want to be thought of as just a, a child who didn't do anything themselves. So kids will oftentimes, even if they inherit wealth, they will oftentimes try to do something. They'll try to set out and do some creative endeavor because they
yeah.
feel this imposter syndrome, sort of where they're like, nobody respects me because I didn't do anything. Now, that is an example of them doing something not because of an imposed difficulty per se, but just because they want to fit in with society. And so, um, so this example that you're presenting of like eh, it of so people are stronger when they go through suffering. This is what everybody says and everybody thinks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a strongly motivating factor to educate yourself. When you suffer, you sort of strongly are motivated to educate yourself because you want to get out of the place you're in. And this is
Mm,
where there could be things which replace all the beneficial components of suffering. So um perhaps providing the education beforehand
mm,
so the person can sort of get access to these ideas. So like if imagine the Ubermensch, right?
mm,
That somebody is given the right selection of information. They're given an understanding that this is critical. They're given an understanding that in order to have a fulfilling and happy life, they have to pursue very, very strongly the goal of innovation and creativity so that they can fit into society and be a
mm,
part of it. Because if they don't do that, even if they're given all their wealth and they can do anything they want, if they don't pursue that, they will not be happy. If
mm.
somebody has that as an understanding, like critically, then where is the suffering necessary?
Right, right, right. I see what you're getting on now. You're basically criticizing Nietzsche. Right, you're
Really?
basically criticizing Nietzsche. Is it really necessary for you to suffer to grow? Right. I'd say, you laid out as example of a rich man um, going through creative endeavor, but I think he would still need to suffer in order for him to attain the top creativity that he desires. Unless if you wanna control that with your power by paying, you know, certain people, going to network. I mean, you could do that. Um, in fact, a lot of people have done that. Um, Now, would you say that's all right? Yeah, but I mean, I can get on with it. Um, but I would say there's still gonna be an element of suffering there if the person truly wants to become creative. Let's say if the rich man wants to, the son of the rich man wants to paint and wants to become the best painter, then yes, I think he would still suffer. Um, with loads of practice, with hours of editing, with hours of getting advice from people. So yeah,
Now, how are you
I don't think
defining?
you can escape.
You were defining
Yeah,
suffering as loads of practice. That's how you were defining it. I,
yeah,
I'm isolating suffering to external imposed, so like societally imposed pressures. So like somebody keeps money away from you so that your life's more difficult, right? So they have the access to like make your life more easy by paying for things, but they take it away so that
yeah,
because this is if you talk to rich people, this is what they'll base the reason they have so much money on is they're like, well, I can't give money away because people need to have
yeah. Well,
difficulties to, right? And that's what
mm,
I'm entirely isolating it to. I'm saying that the suffering gets internalized, so it should go to some other place. It should go to some other. Once if society imposed suffering is removed, it goes to some other place. It's not that it's gone entirely. It goes to practice. It goes to sort of an internalized state.
Mm,
And so you are also like sort of breaking down how suffering sort of provides this motivation. But if we break that down further, like what suffering does to provide people motivation, like what does suffering actually give people? Let's break that down. So what suffering gives people is motivation to learn, and that's exactly what it gives. That's the core element
mm,
of it. So you have
yeah.
motivation to learn, and I'm saying that this can be replaced with something else. So the motivation can be um, some other thing. The motivation can be sexual selection, or it can be social integration, and that motivation can be
Mm,
just as strong. So the person, uh, it can, because like, so when I said before, like, well, education, you give people to sort of create the maybe non-Nietzschean Ubermensch, but the idea of the Superman, in order to have this person who just internally they just do things even without suffering. In order to have that, you just give them information. But this is not taking into account that they need to have the motivation to integrate that information. And until they see the need for it, they're not gonna
mm,
they're not gonna integrate it. And this is where I'm saying that that need, that like deep instinctual evolutionary
mm,
need to integrate the information doesn't have to derive from suffering. It could derive from mate selection. Because if you play this out, like all the people who don't do work, well, they're not going to be as successful
mm,
in mate selection as those who do work, and the next generation will have eliminated that entire group of people who didn't do anything, given the
mm,
opportunity
mm,
not to do
mm.
anything.
Yeah. But it's interesting how we go on with a single word. Like we're actually doing dialogus right now. Like we're actually having a dialogue of that we kind of like we're kind of narrowing down the definition of suffering, um, which is good. Um, yeah, I'm still hesitant to say. Yeah, I get what your um, you know, where your argument is leading to. Um, and it's certain the case that we can kind of that suffering wouldn't be as isn't a prerequisite for you for a person to go with their um with the ways that they desire. um but I would still kind of still insist on there's still going to be an element of suffering, because if it's like I said, we are the my counter arguments to you is kind of it's inevitable. And I know that's not what you're intending to go towards to. But it's still, I think there's still gonna be an element of suffering, because for me,
Mhm.
my understanding of your suffering, like you kind of go with like a binary yes or no suffering. Yeah, I will suffer. Not maybe for me, it's kind of a scale. You need to have a certain level of suffering in order for you to be motivated. Because if you say no suffer at all, like 0% suffer, I think I don't know how to conceptualize that. I think the way that I see that, it kind of like a utopian world where everything is being saved in front of you. There's like no motivation at all. Maybe perhaps I'm confusing my modeling myself with um, motivation equals suffering. Um, I don't know. I think I'm getting
Well,
lost with the semantics.
yeah,
um,
let me define suffering in a way that I'm implicitly thinking about, but I haven't explicitly defined. Um, what I'm thinking about in terms of suffering is sort of a slave to suffering thing. So
mm,
suffering is something which happens all the time to people. Just a little, what it is, it's maybe a little um shot of some neurochemical that makes them view something negatively. They do something, they touch something hot, they get a blast of this neurochemical and they don't want to do it. The difference
mm,
between what I'm talking about and and suffering as such is that I'm talking about people kind of in a constant state of suffering. So like, they're poor and they're just constantly weighed down by the weight of social pressure and aff- not able to do things and the existential dread and all these things.
mm,
Suffering can be almost not suffering. It can almost just be an adjustment type thing. You feel something, you adjust away from it. That is the function of the broken down neurochemical function
so
of suffering.
so you kind of derive suffering as an emotion. Is that what you're saying?
It's a movement. I mean, it can be emotional because emotions are a certain stage in, you know,
Yeah.
prefrontal cognition, I would say more, um, or at
Mm,
least maybe a communication between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. There's an awareness of emotions, but like really the function of suffering is this sort of like I don't want to do this. Like your cognition goes, I don't want this to happen. That's what suffering is. It's just a internalization of this is not something I want to happen. And then once you've internalized it, the
mm,
suffering goes away
right, right.
because you understand it.
Yeah. Um, I do have a trouble with that definition because let's say let's put out the Auschwitz example. Um, when what's his name, the writer Viktor Frankl, when he put out the example of the train heading away, turning away from Auschwitz. Auschwitz is the concentration camp. He said that they were very happy. They were very happy that they're not going towards death. And even when they weren't fed for 2 days, even if they weren't showered for 2 days, they were. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know the exact scenario, but you get the idea. Even if somebody else was beaten many, many times, that person was the most happiest person that you can ever see. Now, by that example, how would you categorize suffering there? Would you say that the physical torment is suffering itself? Because what Viktor Frankl was saying there is happiness rather than suffering. Do you get what I
What do you
trying
mean
to
by
differentiate?
happiness? I thought I followed you right until you said happiness rather than suffering.
Yeah, so they were suffering. They were suffering. They weren't being fed. They weren't. They were in a like the most unimaginable scenario of habitation. Um, Yet they were happy. They were very happy that they didn't go. They that they didn't die. So with that illustration, would you say that suffering is kind of like a um, physical realm? Is in the physical realm because they certainly, well, according to Viktor Frankl, they weren't suffering; they were very happy. So do you know what I mean? I'm like, kind of like
Yeah,
separating.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
well, um, and to clarify, they're happy because they're not dying. They're happy just to be alive, right? To some degree.
yeah, they're happy that they didn't that the train didn't go to Auschwitz and whatever
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
circumstances.
So, um, it's a tree of knowledge construct is what suffering is really. So, at every stage of the tree, you have a suffering. You part of the tree of knowledge. You have suffering and you have uh happiness or positive emotion, and so you have things which at this level you do not want to happen, but then at this level, this is still more desirable. Like the base of the tree is don't die, and then don't get physically hurt. Probably more primitively, don't die, don't take physical permanent damage, don't take damage short
Mm,
term. And
mm,
you have this thing going up. Then don't take social damage. Don't take. You have this whole construction, and so down here at the base, don't die. Any branch
mm,
which is not dying
mm,
is absolute optimal.
mm. Right. Um. Okay. I think what you're getting now is utilitarianism, because you are creating this scale. Because John Stuart Mill, he's a philosophy. Um, his entire thesis is we need happiness. What we want in life is actually pleasure and happiness. But he defined pleasure as something that is good rather than mere hedonic, erotic, or whatever, biological impulse that you have. Um, and then at the very end of it, I'm not sure if it defines this as suffering, like at the very end of it. So maybe that's your definition of suffering. Um, Kind of like a utilitarian thing that we have to. It's not necessarily the case that we have to you need to go away. We need to go away from non-pleasure to pleasure. Um, to I don't know where I'm gonna go from there. But it's not necessarily the case that suffering or pain would necessary for you to get better or improve in life. Kind of like a yeah. I think that's what you're getting at. Utilitarian in definition. Would that be
Um,
fair?
yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. So the I remember we got into this topic because
Mhm.
we were sort of saying like what I was trying to break down suffering to show that its core function isn't necessary in itself, but it's the motivating factor of it, is what I was saying. And so like that's why I'm breaking it down in that way to say that like it's this tree of knowledge of basically saying what we should be doing and what we should not be doing. So what I'm saying is that at every level, it's a motivation towards something. And I would uh it seems that if we analyze what that always is, the dichotomy between suffering and happiness, what it is it's a movement towards higher levels of beautiful, harmonious complexity. So people want to be in relationships, people want to have children. These are things which are increases in the beautiful complexity in their life. People don't want to lose limbs. Why? Because if
Mm,
you lose a limb, you can't do as much in life. There's not as much. You're simpler. You're more primitive. The more you the more you lose, the less beautiful life is. And so this is where I'm saying that that is the function of suffering. It's a move towards higher levels of beautiful complexity. So if you remove socially imposed, um, external socially imposed difficulties, social difficulties, you don't necessarily lose that vital function because you can still have motivation to do those higher order things because
mm,
sort of suffering is just like the most primitive way of that. It's just like, well, like the Maslow's hierarchy. It's like, well, let's just not, we need to have these very base things. We need to first be alive. We need to first then not take damage. These things need to be
mm,
built
mm,
up. They're like, they're like, they're necessary, but they're not necessary for motivation. They're just like first
mm, mm.
requirements.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say it's maybe synonymous to utilitarian um,
Okay.
suffering,
Wait, could
and
could
yeah.
you define that utilitarian idea again then?
So utilitarianism is what
Okay,
we need.
so utilitarian, let me just say, so utilitarianism is that everything is like tools. Like it's everything is like uh there's a moral hierarchy of things based on their utility. That's
Uh, maybe not necessarily. No, I would say it's kind of simplifying moral and yeah, I would say more moral or what must ought to do if politically maybe as well, or in an individual level on how we can achieve things or kind of like the best well-being of yourself. And what's his name? Stuart Mill, John Stuart Mill is saying that we have a scale, and we must, what we really want is pleasure and happiness, and we instantly think that's hedonic pleasure, but actually hedonic pleasure, it means suffering, it means pain, rather than rather than happiness, because in the short term your benefit, you are um, gratifying your biological impulse, but in the long run is actually going to harm you, versus to, what is good and pleasurable, because pleasure in the long run is, you're gonna, if you stop eating cakes or ice cream, it is it is annoying, and it is not gratifying, but in the long run it's going to benefit you because you're going to have better health, better 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 everything, better well-being. So I think, yeah, that would be, is that a fair,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, okay, so it is a utilitarian, okay, definition. I agree. um so I think we can define suffering then as, something that is long-term better rather than short-term,
That's
um
sacrifice, right?
yeah, sacrifice, yeah, okay, so that's a better
That's
word then, yeah.
that would be a yeah, more useful word in that case, yeah.
Yeah, so it's more, trading the short term for the long term, right? Okay, yeah, I'd say, yeah, I it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, we got into this model, or maybe I did, only just to end up with one idea from one person. Um, so we kind of go with this, semantics. I got lost into the semantics, um, only to try to kind of like, you know,
Well, yeah,
define.
it's the definitions are kind of the first thing that needs to happen in a conversation, like define
Yeah,
because everybody I see people talk kind of past each other so long because they're equivocating the other person's version of the definition with their version of the definition, and it's just like
yeah.
the
No,
definitions need to be clarified first. Yeah.
right. Right. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Um, yeah. Um, now that you mentioned that, what is your view in politics? Especially, I'm not sure how you are with American politics. How do you see Candace Owens? How do you see her? Um, like, what is your comment on that? Have you watched or know anything about, what's going on?
I saw something related to her talking about conspiracy, you could say, you know, things that happened behind the scenes in relation to Charlie Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
My initial perception of this was like that, just like at a low resolution, I thought to myself, well, this seems highly convenient that the most nationally significant piece of news, she happened to have an inside scoop of information that can't be immediately articulated in one sitting and requires people to continuously follow her just to learn more about the depth of it. I
Mm-hmm.
thought the convenience of that, of like her happening to have something which requires people to constantly listen to her and there's no immediate payout, just feels really um,
Mm-hmm.
bad uh, because
Right.
it
Mm-hmm.
seems it seems highly likely that people are crazy and get caught up by social waves and do commit crimes. That seems way more likely than some unarticulatable conspiracy that she's presenting.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, on the face of it, feel like they would define it as a grifter, essentially.
Right,
Uh,
right,
and
right.
and then just overview of like you asked about politics in general. But my view about politics in general is that politics, when done correctly, are meant to take all the issues and then kind of try to divide a line right down the middle. And then,
Yeah,
so I wouldn't necessarily say I'm left or right. Like politics, when done well, both like it should be kind of both
yeah.
are as close to the middle as possible.
Sorry, can I request something? Can we stop this?
Yeah.
I just really want to go to the toilet.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
then, yeah, we can cut it. Is that all right? So,
Oh,
because we're
yeah.
in a new topic anyway. Yeah.
Sure.
Um,